Can you give me a thumbs up when you hear it?
Beloved maiden, sweet Brigid, you are the spring and new life for this world. Men may defile you, woman may banish you, but you cannot be removed from the soil. There was a moment you could not bear it all, and your tears soaked the earth for what you saw. And on that hallowed ground there grew a fruit tree, with Eden's fruit brought to light through your tears. Oh, wise midwife, threshold keeper, there's a harsh, bitter cold in these times. But in your tender heart, there lives a beauty. It's the gold that fills the cracks where we divide. Beloved maiden, sweet Brigid, you are the spring and new life in my veins. Men may defile you, woman may banish you, but you cannot be removed from the soil.
Thank you. Pam.
Thank you, Simon. That was absolutely beautiful. And it captured the essence of Brigid. It was just so powerful, because one of the things that we tend to do with our heroes and our heroines and our saints is to picture them as somehow so holy that they floated through life and nothing really touched them. And they were able to just hold this presence of God and the divine so perfectly and with such courage that they never doubted. When in fact, the opposite is quite true. I believe that Brigid and all of the saints and those who've gone before as heroes and heroines for us embraced life with a depth and breadth that brought not only joy, but tears, that brought not only celebration, but deep challenge. It was profoundly engaging life with all of its light and its shadow, and yet finding a path through that is their greatest gift to us. Not to hold them on some high holy pedestal to something we can never attain, but rather a companion on the path of life that we can be inspired by and comforted by and companioned by as we go through our lives with all of its ups and downs and ins and outs. The chapter in Drinking from a Sacred Well by John Matthews, who's one of my favorite writers and people, does a lot of work around Celtic spirituality and around Grail legends, called Brigid of Kildare, All the Bright Blessings. It's the name of the chapter, All the Bright Blessings. And he talked about how her life was marked by divine fire. Burning light was seen emanating from her and all around her throughout her life. And her name actually can come from an ancient Gaelic word that means fiery arrow. Fiery arrow. And he says, as I shared in the prayer, even now the eternal flame of Brigid's hearth is burning to fuel our own voyages in search of inner light. Because her story is wonderful, but unless it intersects with us on our journey, it really doesn't hold real meaning and real power. Joseph Campbell speaks of the importance of story, not just as something for entertainment, but as something to help on the journey of your soul through this world and beyond. As we shared earlier, February the 1st is her Saint's Day, which is also the celebration of the Celtic goddess Brigid of fire and light. And so you've got this ancient Druidic Celtic goddess and this Christian saint that have basically the same name and overlay one another. They are all the energy that represents this divine feminine energy being profoundly present in the midst of life. February the 2nd is Candlemas in Imbolc, where the beginning of spring comes on the cross-quarter day. The church does Candlemas then, which is candle mass, which is the lighting of candles as well, to mark the real noticing of the shift into the light of spring. It's also a time, and Brigid's associated with wells all around the world, holy water, where that which is moving beneath the surface of the earth, flowing always, is welcome to the surface by humanity in the digging and maintaining and blessing of the wells. And Brigid is associated with the energy of the wells. And if you go over to Great Britain, to Ireland, you'll see frequently on the trees around the well ribbons and pieces of fabric with prayers written on them, or just pieces of fabric that have been placed on the trees to blow in the wind at the sacred well by the light of the sun and the moon, and they represent the prayers of the people. There's an ancient tradition that you might like to try this year, which is on Monday, St. Brigid's Day, take a shawl or a piece of fabric or a cloak and set it out and ask it to be blessed. Leave it there through Candlemas, through Imbolc, and then honor the blessings that have been woven into it by the presence of spirit. Because in the traditions of Brigid, when you do that, that cloak, that cloth, that piece of fabric becomes infilled with healing energy and with the light and presence of the divine. It's part of the tradition. Midwives would then wrap these cloaks around women in labor to bring them comfort and to ease their pain. Light, water, presence. That's what Brigid is all about. She lived from 451 to 525 AD, and she was frequently associated, as I've said, not only with fire and light, but with the shining ones, the angelic presences that seem to surround her. I'm sure there were divas from nature that shone around her as well. She's one of the three patron saints of Ireland, along with Patrick and Columba. And I love the fact that her father was nobility, but her mother was a slave, and her mother embraced some of the Christian traditions according to some legends, not according to others, and her father was a Druid. And she was actually given birth to, her mother gave birth to her in the threshold of a doorway, holding the sides of the doorway. And so Brigid came into the world on a threshold, on a doorway. And so she was always a threshold person that could see the beauty of the manifest world and see the presence of spirit. She could embrace nature and embrace humanity. And she herself is a threshold energy between what was and what is yet to be, balancing and harmonizing of differences. It was said that when she was a baby, that neighbors walked by the house and they called for help because the house seemed to be on fire. And they came running back to put out the fire, and all was well. There was no damage to the house. And they went in and they realized that the light that looked like fire had come from the baby in the crib. And they called in the Druid, and he said, "This child is blessed with the inner fire." And from this inner fire came her calling. She says, "Christ dwells in every creature." And so she represented this profound inner light that was then called to live to be expressed. And what's fascinating is that when she was first blessed, by some traditions, St. Patrick, other traditions, he had lived far before this. But energetically, I like the idea of St. Patrick blessing her. And he's blessing her to give her a baptism. And instead, he sees her inner light and it radiates all around her. And so he ends up ordaining her to the priesthood instead. Talk about an interesting threshold. She came to be baptized, the light filled the moment, and she went forth ordained. Another episode happened many years later where she was preparing to take her nun's vows. And she was before the Bishop Nell, and he saw the fires descending upon her. And they said things began to blossom all around where she was. And the Bishop Nell, instead of blessing her with her nun's vows, instead consecrated her on the spot a bishop. Another moment where someone of significance beheld the gifts that she was bearing, even though it was in the form of a woman and someone who had begun as a slave and not as the legitimate child of anyone. Here she was being honored and celebrated. And thank heavens there were those who had the eyes to see and to then welcome her gifts. She actually ended up forming a monastery that was one of the largest in all of Ireland. It was called a dual monastery because it had both men and women, and she was the spiritual leader there. This was not as unusual in Ireland. If you've read the book, How the Irish Saved Civilization, women were much more honored in that tradition than in the traditional patriarchal system of the Church of Rome and Roma. And so she led this monastery, and she wove a shroud for St. Patrick. She foretold the birth of St. Columba. She did miracles all through her life of healing and of supply. She preached, she led. She was truly a living example, and she became, as Simon said, the Mary of the Gaels, the Celtic Gaelic Mary, the divine feminine energy. And I love her story because it showed that she was willing to have the courage to let her light shine, but to be of service wherever and however it was meant to be. She was totally willing to be baptized and take the vows of the nun. But instead, Spirit took that moment to recognize her gifts and to say, let us send you forth, ordained and now a bishop to lead others. All of us in life have moments where we come to those thresholds, those turning points. What do we or don't we do with our lives? Who is there to help us and to be present with us, to see us, even when we don't see in ourselves that shining light? She was a threshold dancer from the moment of her first breath. She danced between those realms of what was expected and what could be, to be baptized and to be a nun, into what could be, fully ordained, and then a bishop to lead. And yet she didn't do it alone. There were those who were there with her and saw and recognized with her, and then expressed it in an outer way that honored it. As a threshold blesser, as a threshold dancer, from slave to honored, free. From the tradition of the Druids in which she was raised into the story of Christianity. Outer expression and inner possibilities she would blend. The elements of fire and water with light and flame and candle and flowing wells. And there's a beautiful, beautiful passage that says that the well light, the well comes to the surface, and that one of the things it does is, now that it is visible on the surface of the world, the light of the divine shines down upon it, and the water itself reflects the light. Doesn't extinguish the light, reflects the light. A blend of fire and water, holding both as sacred. Men and women in her monastery worked and prayed and sang and lived and served together. She worked with those who were ill and brought them healing, was present with them. Where there was lack, she was known to produce milk, crops, whatever was needed would appear so that she might offer in service to the divine, and to link that invisible flow and presence of Spirit with the manifest world that we were living in and are living in. So she was that threshold person all of her life, as all of us are. We're all threshold people to one degree or another. And one of the things that she said that I absolutely loved is she said, we all need Anamkara, soul friends to journey with. We need those special people who can see us and love us unconditionally wherever we are on the journey. And that who in those threshold moments can hold the light for us and with us and behold that light in us. She said, anyone who does not have soul friends, Anamkara, is like a body without a head. A body without a head, if you don't have soul friends. She says, these who abide with us, like for her, Patrick and Mel did, they help us to become whole again. They witness our journey with love and with compassion. And they challenge us in the hard places where we fight against ourselves over and over. They call us to heal the broken places. This comes from the soul's slow ripening. Calls us to heal in the broken places and to become more who we've been sent to be than ever before by being profoundly present, as the Daily Word said, in the now. One of the things that Christine Walters Paintner says in her book is one of the gifts of St. Brigid was that of healing, and that we're all called to heal the broken places. And those threshold moments allow us to see, and that veil becomes thin, and we can open to spiritual healing at every level of being. And she said something that I love, that's something that with my experience as a nurse and as a chaplain and as a minister for all of these years, I could not agree more with. She said, we're called to heal the broken places and to be there with one another for that. But she says healing is very different from curing. Healing is very different from curing. I cannot tell you how true I know that to be from my experiences with people who perhaps prayed for a physical healing from an illness and instead got a soul heart healing with someone in their lives from whom they'd become separated, that this experience brought them back together in compassion and in love. Healing is limitless. Healing's at every level of being. Curing is saying you have to have a specific outcome. Healing is being willing to be present in and with the process. She writes, even if an illness does not go away, the healer within allows us to find some wisdom and grace in the experience and allows us to have some peace and some ease in the midst of unknowing and of pain. Those things we can't control, but we always have the choice of how we can choose to react and to respond. St. Brigid's life was not an easy one, but it was one of a soul lived, holding the light and the presence of the divine to the best of her being, not as someone different than us, but calling us to walk with her. We're in the process right now as a country of a tremendous need for healing. It's not about curing one side or another. It's about healing. It's about finding the anamkara that we can walk through this with so we know we're not alone. It's about honoring thresholds, those in-between places where we don't know what's going to happen next, where we may be experiencing deep challenge and deep pain, but the presence of the divine is there. And we can come into that just like Brigid did, unattached and open to the holy moment now as to what can we do to hold the light for ourselves and for our world. How can we restore the holy wells? That's actually very deeply tied to the Grail Quest. The Grail Quest, a portion of that is recognizing the divine within you and within everyone. It's the re-honoring and reconsecration of the divine feminine and the divine feminine sites, which include the wells, where that divine flow comes above ground to be tended. It comes up to nourish us and also to reflect the light above for us. And that light and filled water, when we drink of it, is that living water that Jesus talks about in the Bible, that nourishes and quenches the thirst of your soul for the presence of God. It doesn't happen separate from and on a pedestal from. It happens in the midst of life and is an echo of the song that Simon did that is so beautiful. I would like to close today with St. Brigid and the Fruit Tree, which is a poem written by Christine Walters Paintner. Simon's actually, I believe, turned this into a song. He has read this before. The first time I heard this poem was in Simon's beautiful, beautiful Scottish brogue. So I will try and do it justice.
Oh, I'm sure you will, Pam. Yes.
There was the moment you could bear it no more. Your eyes brimming with great glistening drops, summoned by the hunger of the world, the callous and terrible things men and women do to one another. Your tears splashed onto stony earth, ringing out like bells, calling monks to prayer, like the river breaking open to the wide expanse of sea. From that salt-soaked ground, a fruit tree sprouts and rises. I imagine pendulous pears, tears transmuted to sweetness. There will always be more grief than we can bear. There will always be ripe fruit, flesh, making your fingers sticky from the juice. Life is tidal, rising and receding in long loneliness, in lush loveliness. No need to wish for low tide when the banks are breaking. The woman in labor straddles the doorway, screaming out your name. You stand there on the threshold weeping, and the pear trees still burst into blossom. Their branches hang so heavy, low, you don't even have to reach. And she closes with this blessing. May all of your tears be transformed into ripe, sweet fruit. May you find yourself on the journey toward wholeness with Brigid as companion and guide, and may the days ahead bring the delight of these companions to your side again and again. Thank you for being my Anam Cara and for being Anam Cara to one another and to the world. Bless you, Simon.